Hey there guys, we're testing out Wolfenstein: The New Order running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U, this time with 16 gigabytes of RAM. Last time we tested it with 8 gigabytes of RAM. Ignore the RAM usage number that it shows there. It is not calculated the same as the other videos, so they are not comparable, but the performance that you're seeing here is with 16 gigabytes of RAM instead of the 8 gigabytes of RAM that was in the other system, though it was at dual channel as well. So really all we're getting here is just more RAM capacity. We're not even getting a bandwidth increase in terms of just like the speed of the RAM or anything like that. Now here the game is running at 1080p with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and the TDP is set to 15 watts instead of the 25 watts of the other video. So this time around we're getting pretty much equal or better performance to what we were getting at 25 watts with 8 gigabytes of RAM. And overall the performance that we're getting here is just a lot better in the sense that it is smoother, though 1080p is really pushing this chip. You can see that the frame times are still all over the place, especially when action really starts to ramp up. So it can get pretty difficult to play like this in high action areas. Because we're at the lowest graphical settings already, pretty much the only thing we can do now is reduce the resolution. So I decided to drop it down to 900p. Now 900p pretty much just gives us a nice little bump in the overall averages and 1% lows, though nothing remarkable here. And you can see that the GPU isn't exactly being 100% utilized. So already we've alleviated a lot of the issues that we would have had from that. And I think we're at this point just reaching like a bottleneck somewhere else in the system that isn't just the GPU. Now the game itself actually has a 60 FPS cap. You just in-game cannot go higher than that. If you're in the main menu, you can get hundreds of frames per second, but while actually playing the game, it is capped at 60. But because we're running into a limitation here in the sense that the GPU is not being fully utilized, I decided, well, okay, let's drop things down to 720p and see what is the highest graphical setting that we can actually go with. So I started to mess around with 720p, and here it is at the lowest graphical settings. Just for comparison's sake, you'll see that we're at a pretty much locked 60 most of the time, with 1% lows that are just dipping down into the mid 40s. But you'll see with the frame times that there's no major spikes or anything like that that made the experience of trying to play this difficult or anything like that. This was a very smooth, very enjoyable experience. And you'll see that the GPU is really not even reaching 90% utilization most of the time here. So we are limited essentially by either the CPU or just something else in the system. But what we can do is, of course, raise the graphical settings to see if we can't put more of a load on that GPU. So here we have the game running with a 25 watt TDP. And again, you'll see that wattage is kind of all over the place. It's not exactly staying at a completely locked 25 all of the time, just because of the fact that the 60 FPS limit pretty much means that once the game is able to produce that 60 FPS, it doesn't really need to render anything more, though it will just end up using more CPU. And you can see by the fact that the GPU itself is just really still not being fully utilized here. And so at the 25 watts, I decided, well, okay, this time around, let's just crank things up and see what we end up getting here. So I found that at 720p, we could pretty much set the graphics settings all the way to high, and we still weren't even fully utilizing the GPU here. So the game itself seems to be capable of running pretty well at a relatively consistent 60 FPS experience, or at least close to it. The average here is slightly below 60, and the 1% lows are dropping a bit into the mid 40s, but it's really nothing bad, and it feels perfectly fine, especially because it's within the FreeSync range of the display on this laptop anyway. So there is no screen tearing that's noticeable on here. In the video itself, you are going to probably see screen tearing because my capture card does not support FreeSync, in the sense that the captured footage itself is not running with FreeSync. But the internal display of the laptop itself actually does run with FreeSync if I leave it within the range. So games like this, where they have a locked FPS of 60, pretty much end up looking really good on here, just because of the fact that even if we're not getting the consistent 60, as long as it's not dipping down too low, it's still going to look pretty good on this display. But pretty much with the 16 gigabytes of RAM, you have a lot of flexibility on how you want to run this game. It can run at 1080p as long as you don't mind the dips, and of course it will also run pretty well at 720p. So if you have something like a Steam Deck, I bet this game runs beautifully at the maximum settings, because this is already at the high preset and it runs pretty decently. If we double the performance of this GPU, we're gonna get some insane performance. But anyways, I want to thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you found the video useful. If you did, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.